Dawn over Saxony. A young American radar navigator leans into the glow of an H2X scope, the AN divided by APS-15 that turns smoke into shapes. His lead ship is a B-17G from the 8th Air Force, engines steady, wings filmed with ice, crew silent. Ahead lies Dresden, a city that believed it was too beautiful and too far east to be touched. The British hit last night. The fires still breathe. The American job today is not the city. It is the rails that make a war move. The navigator watches the round screen bloom and fade as the formation slides to the initial point. He keys the interphone. Steady. The bombardier rides the leader. One precise solution will guide the bomb bays of the stream. That morning solves a hard problem. How do you hit a target through smoke, heat shimmer, and winter cloud? You build a tool that ignores the weather, you train crews to trust it, and you design tactics so a confident few can carry the many. That is what the 8th Air Force did on 14 February 1945. Long-range P-51D Mustangs ride shotgun. B-17Gs hold tight spacing, while the H2X scope paints the Friedrichstadt marshalling yards as a ghostly oval within the Elbe bends. From the ground it looks like apocalypse. From the cockpit it is a checklist. Fuel, oxygen, intervalometer, radar, aim point, salvo. A prisoner in a hospital barrack, an American named Jack Mercer, hears the day change before he understands it. The ward windows throb. He smells coal, wet wood, and blood metal. A nurse he cannot see speaks the word Dresden like a prayer and a warning. He counts the seconds between rolling thumps and knows this is not random. Trains once moaned past at all hours. Now there is only the wind. He writes later, "I heard a war end in the rails." German defenders did not expect this. Many believed Dresden's distance kept it safe. Others believed Allied crews needed the palace skyline as a landmark. But the Americans don't need landmarks. They have radar returns and a disciplined way of turning them into aim points. Luftwaffe officers know their own night fighters grew draggy with antennas and heavy with gear. Pilots complain that Allied electronics seem a generation ahead. The day strikes prove it. The city that seemed out of reach is suddenly a reachable network of rails, bridges, and switches. The hardware matters. H2X does not look like glory. It looks like a round screen and a team that trusts what it shows. The B-17G is not the fastest bird in 1945, but it is dependable, with the chin turret, the Cheyenne tail, and a belly built to carry 4,000 to 6,000 pounds a long way. The P-51D, with its Packard-built Merlin, keeps the wolves away. None of this appears in marble, but it wins wars. Airfields in England work like factories. Fuel trucks, armourers, weather officers, cooks, medics, an assembly line with propellers. Here is a number that still stuns. On that day, the 8th Air Force dispatched 1,377 bombers and 962 fighters across Germany. Think about the crews, the spare parts, the radios warmed before dawn, the maps folded to the grid, the oxygen bottles filled by men who will never see Saxony. Think about the choreography that gets hundreds of heavy bombers off wet concrete in winter, formed up without collisions, navigated over flak and fighters, then rearmed and refueled to do it again tomorrow. Only a free, industrial giant can do that. And here is a number that ends arguments. After years of myth, the city's own historians fixed the dead at roughly 25,000. It is a terrible count, and it is an honest one. The figure includes residents and refugees, bodies recovered and bodies cremated on the Altmarkt. Democracies keep the ledger even when it hurts. They separate rage from record. The American story does not hide from the cost. It shows why the blows were aimed where they were aimed, and why cutting rails matters when an enemy runs on coal and timetables. What does this mean at eye level? It means a station master wiping ash from a telegraph key and finding the line dead in 3 directions. It means a locomotive that cannot move because a switch has become a crater. It means reserve battalions that cannot arrive, ammunition that cannot be shifted, and wounded who must wait because sidings are twisted steel. It means officers in Berlin staring at maps and knowing their arrows are lies until someone repairs the web. It means an American crew climbing down from the B-17 at dusk, with faces blackened and eyes rimmed white, drinking hot coffee from paper cups, and hearing the ops officer say the quiet words every crewman loves, to results observed. Britain's night attack lit the fuse. America's daylight attack cut the cables. Together they formed a rhythm tyrants cannot match. A city gripped in fire by night, and a network gripped by math at noon. The navigator who leaned into that H2X scope did not think in philosophy. He thought in drift, ground speed, lead and lag, and the placement of a bright cloud on a cathode tube. But when he called steady, he became a thread in a national tapestry. Engineers in Seattle, machinists in Detroit, oil workers in Texas, teachers who turned farm boys into mechanics, planners who timed the bomb run to the second. The hook here is simple because the truth is simple. A city that thought it was safe learned that America could make weather irrelevant and distance meaningless. The day's work ends with Bombay doors closing, escorts reforming, and the long grey run home over the North Sea. Down below, rail yards burn, timetables curl. The wind pulls the smoke east, and a prisoner named Mercer, who has no weapon but time, feels the war tilt in his bones and knows he will live to go home because a nation learned how to turn electricity into aim. Engines cough to life in the dark, and a crew chief named Walter Price rubs oil between his fingers and reads it like a book. He signs off a supercharger change on a B-17G and slaps the cowl with a cowl, grease-black palm. In another tent, armourers hoist general-purpose bombs, set fuses for tracks and rolling stock, and chalk arrows on casings showing which way to tumble through roof and girder before they burst. To America, it is choreography. The airfield is a factory that ships shock to the enemy by the hour. The truth is tools and timing. The 8th Air Force wins because maintenance is religion, because a sergeant can swap a magneto in a snow flurry with a flashlight between his teeth, because the right spark plug arrives at midnight on a truck that never sleeps. The quiet heroes stand in fuel lines and parts lines and mess lines, so the bomb line runs on the minute. A British POW called Taffy Morgan hears the morning's first revs and smiles through cracked lips. "The Yanks are cutting arteries," he whispers to a fellow prisoner. He knows the pattern. Trucks at 2, engines at 4, wagons of bombs at 5, briefing at 6, wheels up with sunrise. He has learned that the Americans do not just throw punches, they cut systems. Rails, bridges, switchyards, powerhouses, the places where a regime carries its life. On 14 February 1945, while British night crews cool their engines after the firestorm, US ground crews in England move like a pit lane in a title fight. The day will send hundreds of fortresses and escorts east. The targets are not palaces. They are the Friedrichstadt and Neustadt yards, the knot where trains to the Eastern Front and the South pass through Dresden's throat. Weather is bad. H2X will carry the aim through smoke. Ask the hard question that every German asked that morning. How do they launch this many aircraft, in winter, under cloud, with fuel and fuses right, and crews briefed to the second? The answer is American standardization. Each base runs like the other. Each group can plug into the stream. When a lead ship aborts, another steps forward with the same checklists and doctrine. That sameness is not dullness. It is freedom from improvising the basics so brains can solve new problems. When an unexpected wind shear drags the formation late, navigators do the math because they are not inventing the math. They are applying it. Imagine the scale. In that single day, across Germany, 1,377 bombers and 962 fighters are dispatched. Think about the trucks that brought 100-octane fuel to the coast, the tank farms that stored it, the pipeline crews who repaired leaks at night, the clerks who kept inventories clean so a crew chief knew a carburetor was on hand. Think about the weather officers who briefed icing altitudes and winds aloft, the cooks who served hot breakfast at 3, the chaplains who stood in doorways when crews hustled to the hard stands, the medics who warmed morphine in their hands. This is what a republic looks like when it is all in. A young Mustang pilot, flying the P-51D with the Merlin singing at 27 inches and 2700 RPM, leans down and tightens his oxygen mask. He has one job: keep the wolves off the forts while they make war's math. He will not become a household name. He will become a reason a bombardier gets 10 more seconds to settle the sight picture of a radar scope. From the German side, the day feels different now. Controllers try to plot the incoming raid, but jamming scratches the screens and confuses calls. Interceptors are vectored late. They arrive high and fast, or low and slow, always a step behind. A station master reads the telegrams that fell from the night's pockets. Refugees pouring west, wounded moving east, ammunition running short, priority red. He knows what the day will bring if the Americans cut the yards again. It does not. Radar ignores smoke. The bomb run is all discipline. The lead ship calls the time to green. The toggles click. Bombs step off racks like parade boots. The ground jumps. Tracks snap. A signal box disappears into a white flash and a brown roar. Taffy hears it from the wire and looks up. "On time," he says softly, like a railway man tapping a watch. A guard curses the Mustangs and spits into the mud. Taffy cocks his head and hears a silence between blasts that is bigger than any noise, the silence of trains that are not moving. America's process is the story. A machinist in Detroit finished supercharger vanes months ago. A refinery in Texas split gasoline into high-octane magic. A foreman in a Kansas plant checked a radio set with a pencil and a prayer. None of them will ever see Dresden. All of them are in Dresden. The 8th Air Force's doctrine is simple and hard. Daylight if you can, radar if you must, transport first, repeat tomorrow. It sounds cold. It is merciful in the only way war can be. It ends things. At debrief, the lead navigator sketches the Elbe bend on a board and marks the oval where the scope glowed bright. Secondary explosions observed. Tracks cut. Smoke to 20,000 feet. Crews gulp black coffee and sign their names. A German lieutenant in a flak battery writes to his wife that evening, "We cannot stop their system. He respects his men. He respects the enemy more. He sees it now the Americans have turned industry into a clock, and every tick is an airplane overhead." Jack Mercer in the barracks rolls a pencil between his fingers and writes, "No whistles today." He thinks about home. He thinks about rails. He decides to live. America sends current from 1,000 towns into one bright arc over Saxony. The light is harsh. It is also the light by which tyranny collapses. That is the revelation. There is no miracle, only millions of ordinary miracles carried out on time by free people who know their work matters. And when that work cuts the enemy's arteries, the whole body goes weak. Smoke towers twist over Dresden like black ropes and the wind plays them like a harp. A lead bombardier in a B-17G studies a trembling H-2X scope and feels the old fight between nerves and training. He knows his job is not the city. It is the rails. It is the points, the switches, the sidings where Germany turns coal and men into motion. He speaks into the interphone and feels the crew lean forward together. How do you hit a target you cannot see? The question is not poetic. It is practical. The American answer is H-2X radar AN divided by APS-15, married to formation discipline so one precise radar solution can guide an entire box. The scope paints the Friedrichstadt yards as a pale oval against the river curve. He breathes once and waits for the cue. On the ground, a German station master stands on the platform and tastes smoke. He knows the RAF came in 2 waves at night. He did not expect daylight. He did not expect Americans to ignore weather like a solved equation. Jack Mercer counts seconds in his hospital barrack. A high, tearing sound like canvas ripping. Then a pause so deep he thinks his heart stopped. Then the next string of impacts, not wandering but walking a line. He has heard random bombing. This is different. This is a metronome. He writes, "They are reading the city like a map. The Luftwaffe tries. Controllers, vector fighters. Jammers smear the plots. a few BF 109 seconds slash at the stream, and find Mustangs waiting with their noses glinting silver. Flak gunners fire by sound and habit because the sightlines are gone. A veteran, grounded by lack of fuel, watches the daylight show and shakes his head. He remembers struggling to hunt bombers with aerials that slowed his machine while British mosquitoes ghosted past. Now he sees Mustangs stitch the sky, and understands that Allied electronics and tactics have lapped them. The Americans do not gloat, they work. Formation leaders hold speed, navigators compute drift. Radio operators guard the call signs and keep the air clear. The airplane is a team sport built in a nation of teams. Why does this matter? Because targets are not just places, they are functions. Dresden is not only palaces and galleries. It is a rail throat, with factories turning out the sinew, too, of war. When you cut that, you do not just punish, you paralyze. An army is a hungry stomach and a schedule. Rails feed both. Taffy presses his ear to the fence and smiles without joy. He tells a German guard, "Your trains won't sing today." The guard spits and says the word Mustangs like a curse and a compliment. In the cockpit, the bombardier gets the signal, bombs away. The ship jumps and floats a little lighter. He looks up and out and sees nothing but the white flash where the signal box should be. He tracks the next bursts, stepping the length of the yard. He whispers, "Good." It is the most human word in a machine war. The 8th Air Force dispatches 1,370, 7 bombers and 960, 2 fighters that day across Germany, much of the bombing by H-2X. The American waves at Dresden are designed to hit the transportation web in daylight after the night firestorm. Britain breaks the city's heart by night. America cuts the arteries by noon. Tyranny cannot stand when both happen in one day. Down in the smoke, the station master finds that his points will not throw, and his telegraph is dead, and his yard is a geometry of craters. He does not see a cathedral. He sees a schedule dying. Mercer hears a different sound now, the hollow clatter of loose rail falling into itself. He knows what that means. No whistles, no troop trains, no ambulances. The Luftwaffe pilot, writing in a notebook he keeps out of habit, admits a thought he hates. We cannot catch them. Our tools are yesterday's tools. He is a brave man. He is out of time. The American crews circle, reform, and point their noses west. They are tired. They are young. They are professionals. In the debrief tent, a lieutenant draws the Elbe bend on a board and marks the oval where the radar return shone. He writes, "Tracks cut, secondary explosions, smoke to 20,000. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. And then the number that closes mouths. After years of inflated myth, Dresden's own. Investigators fixed the dead at roughly 25,000. That number is terrible. It is also true. You cannot honor the living unless you are honest about the dead. This is how democracies fight when they are forced to fight. With engineering, with process, with truth. The goal is not to burn pretty cities. The goal is to make the enemy unable to move or shoot or plan. Americans in that stream are not saints. They are citizens with checklists. They make errors. They fix them. That ethic becomes a weapon. When you scale that habit across a continent, you get a force that tyrants cannot copy. The day ends the way it began, with a scope glowing in a dim compartment and a man trusting it. The airplane tilts home. The crew chief who signed the supercharger touches the warm cowling when his ship returns and grins through exhaustion. The station master counts only silence. The POW counts the beats between blasts and finds none. The Luftwaffe pilot stares at his hands and understands that courage without tools is a prayer without an answer. Night lit the city. Day cut the network. The RAF's night waves had kindled a firestorm in the city centre. The 8th Air Force returned by day on 14 and again on 15 February to strike the marshalling yards. Much of the American bombing was by H-2X through cloud and smoke, a method captured on the radar charts saved in crew kits and museums. Tomorrow will bring more missions, more fuel trucks, more maps marked in grease pencil. Because systems win wars, and America, more than any enemy, has built a system that turns cloud into coordinates and coordinates into endings. Mercer folds his note and stares at the ceiling and whispers, "Home." He does not mean escape. He means the sound of rails that do not carry armies anymore. He means a country that built a radar and a routine to make that happen. He means freedom given a cockpit and a plan. Engines were still ticking hot in England when the next miracle of American scale began far away under fluorescent lights in a Michigan winter. A woman at Willow Run snapped a Cleco fastener, slid a B-24 Liberator skin panel into place, and kept the line moving. That plant could push a completed bomber out the door every 63 minutes at peak, 8,685 Liberators in all, each one a flying promise that distance and weather and time would never again protect a tyrant. People called it the bomber a minute. It was not bragging. It was a production schedule, written into steel. From that schedule flowed a day in February 1945, when American daylight raids could cut Dresden's rail throat hours after a British night firestorm. A crew chief named Walter Price ran a fingertip over fresh safety wire, signed his name in pencil, and slapped the nacelle like a teammate's shoulder. Armourers chalked arrows on general-purpose bombs, set nose and tail fuses for rail cuts, and flipped the safeties last because ritual keeps people alive. The process looked ordinary. It meant a winter morning could start with coffee in a Nissen hut and end with rails torn like zippers 2 countries away. A British prisoner everyone called Taffy listened from behind wire as American trucks snarled in low gear toward the hardstands. He said to no one, "They'll cut the arteries again." He had worked rail before the war. He knew how a nation breathes through switches. The night had been fire and panic. The day, he could tell by the rhythm of engines, would be math. There is a reason the 8th Air Force could send out more than 1,000 bombers and almost 1,000 fighters across Germany on 14 February and still place daylight strikes on the Friedrichstadt and Neustadt yards. The reason is standardization. Training checklists matched maintenance checklists. A crew from Colorado could step into a ship from Connecticut and find the same placards, the same emergency drills, the same data plate on the same radio rack. When cloud hid the world, H2X, radar turned river bends into pale ovals on a scope, and formation tactics let a single precise solution guide dozens of bomb bays. Consider the factory people, a riveter in a bandana, a machinist with a pocket micrometer, a teen with a push broom clearing chips from a milling station. These were the hands that made a radar face glow purple-green in a freezing compartment over Saxony. Willow Run filled the sky with Liberators. Packard's Detroit plant gave the P-50, 1D its Merlin heart. Refineries cracked 100. Octane gasoline that let engines hold manifold pressure at altitude. None of them needed a map of the Elbe. Jack Mercer lay in a hospital barrack and learned to count war by the distance between thumps. When the daylight shocks came in clean strings, he understood somebody had moved from anger to arithmetic. That felt like mercy, even with roofs falling in the old quarter. He whispered, "Finish it." And the man in the next bunk, a Soviet captive with hollow eyes, nodded as if he could see the radar picture too. On the other end of the line, a German station master stood in grit and cinder and tried to throw a point that had become a crater. Telegraph keys were dead. A signal box burned like a kiln. He had lived through sirens before. He had not lived through this, an enemy that could return 12 hours after a firestorm and cut the same joint again, in daylight, through smoke, as if weather were just another checkbox on a form. An American Mustang flight leader rolled high cover over the bomber stream. He flew the P-51D with its bubble canopy and Packard-built V-16507 humming like a saw, drop tanks slung under the wings for the long ride in. He was not famous and did not need to be. His job was the simple math of minutes. Give the bombardiers 8 more seconds on the scope, guard the reform, walk the wolves off the edge of the map. He called tally, turned into a climbing 109, and watched the threat dissolve in a silver flash and a black ribbon of coolant. Here is a fact that lands like a hammer. One American plant could finish a B-24 every 63 minutes at peak, while the enemy, under bombing, struggled to protect the last of its synthetic fuel plants and keep single squadrons serviceable. Willow Run alone delivered thousands of liberators. Across the program, 18,480, 2 B-24 seconds took shape, a number so large it explains February, 1,945, without another sentence. When a republic decides to build at scale and train to standard, the calendar becomes a weapon. Lest pride float away from people, listen to voices. They're cutting the arteries, Taffy said, not as praise, but as a railroader's verdict. No whistles today, Jack Mercer wrote, a tiny sentence that felt like a door opening. A Luftwaffe veteran, grounded and bitter, muttered to a friend, their electronics are always ahead, because saying it plain hurt less than pretending. By dusk, the crews returned over grey water, salt crust on their jackets, faces striped with oxygen mask marks. The crew chief touched warm metal with bare fingers and laughed because his ship had brought her people home. In Dresden, the station master finally stopped trying to throw the ruined points and sat on a crate. He heard no whistles. He heard wind in broken wires and the slow fall of ash. Tomorrow would bring new targets if needed. The secret was no secret. Parts on shelves, fuel in tanks, men and women trained to standard, and a culture that let a sergeant say no go when a spark looked wrong. That is freedom's muscle. It builds, tests, and only then it fights. When it fights, it finishes. A factory light switched on in America could become a dark yard in Saxony by noon. That is the switch getting thrown, and it is why the enemy stopped believing in distance. A Mustang pilot, 22 years old and tight in his parachute straps, rolled left above the bomber stream and saw the world open like a black and white map. Below him, the fortresses held course. Ahead, the smoke over Saxony made its own weather. He flew the P-51D, bubble canopy bright, Packard-built Merlin V-16507 tuned to sing, dropped tanks under the wings for the long ride. He worked the throttle against the detent and watched the coolant needle steady at the line crew's pencil mark. His name did not matter to history. He called tally, snapped toward a climbing off 109, and felt America's newest math click into place. The problem had been simple and lethal for too long. Bombers without escorts bled. The enemy met them fresh at the frontier and fed on the stream. Then long-range escort arrived in strength. P-51Ds roved ahead and above, fought on equal or better terms, and forced the Luftwaffe to spend itself in losing trades. By the time the 8th Air Force came to Dresden by day in February 1945, the escorts were a standing promise. The bombers will get their minutes on target. Escort is not a duel, it is a schedule. Fighter groups take sectors and altitudes like carpenters taking measurements. A radio crackles. A wingman calls a tally at 2 o'clock high. The lead says, "Your bounce." The Mustangs scissor in sun, and the bomber crews keep breathing even when tracers scribble around the windows. Jack Mercer, weak in a hospital barrack, learned to pick out the Mustang engine by ear. He called it the song that kept angry angels away. The guards cursed, "Mustangs!" with a strange mix of hate and respect, the way men curse a tool that works too well against them. Mercer wrote later, "The little ones with the silver noses were the reason the big ones never broke." Up where the air is thin and the stakes are heavy, details matter. A pilot checks mixture and prop, sets 27 inches and 2700, watches manifold pressure hold because some refinery cracked 100 octane and some kid in a motor pool bled the lines. He glances at the K-14 gyro gun sight, thumbs the radio button, and hears a calm voice lay out the geometry of survival. He has never seen a rail yard except as a photograph in a briefing room. Yet his job is to buy 8 seconds for a man staring into a radar scope. Ahead, the Luftwaffe tries to gather. Their veterans are still deadly, but fuel is scarce. Training is short. Antennas and heavy night gear stole speed from many of their fighters. And the Allied electronics war jamming, navigation aids, disciplined radio procedures turned the scramble into a late arrival. A German pilot who had once hunted at night with aerials that dragged like nets now found daylight filled with bright, fast enemies and too little time to convert altitude into kills. Escort changed bomber behavior as much as it changed enemy behavior. With the Mustangs high and close, fortresses kept formation tighter. Tighter formation meant cleaner radar solutions, steadier airspeed, and fewer bombs walking off the aim point. Escort made every link quieter. In the cockpit, the ground school facts finally became flesh. The radiator scoop under the Mustang's belly worked as a Meredith effect device, gain a bit of thrust back from hot air. The laminar, flow wing, loved speed and hated rough handling. The Packard Merlin held power at height that smashed earlier Escort limits. It meant one more turn above the stream, one more bounce timed to perfection, one more enemy pulled off the bombers and dragged into a bad fight. Taffy, the British railman behind wire, did not know the equations of compressibility or the metallurgy of valve guides. He watched contrails cross and separate and said, "They keep the wolves busy so the hammer can fall." A German station master, crouched by a dead telegraph, flinched at a ripping snarl and looked up in time to see a 109 fall trailing a black ribbon that wavered in the wind. He had once believed fighters defended cities. He was learning that American fighters defended minutes. There are quieter victories woven into this day. Escort meant crews came home. Crews coming home meant experience compounding across missions. That meant better briefings, better corrections, better radar interpretations, better confidence when cloud returned and nerves tried to lie. In 1945, America spread it by engine noise. The Mustang pilot settled low behind a 190 that was late to the party and squeezed. The enemy jolted, rolled, and went soft in the sky. The pilot did not cheer. He climbed for position and checked the clock. A minute can save a squadron. A minute can cut a yard. His war was minutes. People sometimes talk about air war as if it were a show. The truth looks like a graph trending down. Bomber loss rates falling as escorts grow. Fangs and discipline grows roots. This is why the daylight strikes on Dresden's rails felt inevitable to the people who understood the system. Not because the enemy lacked courage, but because America had finally matched courage with reach, fuel, radios, and a fighter that could stand guard all the way in and all the way back. Listen to three voices and measure the day. The little ones kept the big ones honest. A waist gunner told a debriefing clerk, rubbing cordite out of his eyes. "Your long fighters steal our time," a captured German mechanic spat on a cold morning, and it sounded more like science than anger. "They were there when the smoke was worst," Jack Mercer wrote, naming an image that fed him hope for months. Dresden's rails did not fail because metal tired of being metal. They failed because American escorts kept a precise promise to American bombers. You will not fight alone on the clock that matters. Below, the scope glowed. Above, a pilot rolled level and marked another quiet victory on the minute hand. When citizens in a free country decide to keep each other's minutes, empires that run on schedules begin to miss their trains. The sky over Saxony proved it. One controlled burst, one steady needle, one shepherded bomb run at a time. Home. The morning begins with pencils, not poetry. Weather charts, winds aloft, fuel tables, target folders, radar overlays, rendezvous times, oxygen checks, call signs. The system wakes before the Sunday. Here is the problem. Simple to ask and almost impossible to solve without America's way of doing things. How do you run 1,000-plane operations in winter, through cloud, against a defended empire, and still hit the right yard at the right minute 2 days in a row? The revelation is not a line of verse. It is a checklist. Standardization, so every cockpit looks like every other cockpit. Mass production, so engines keep coming even when winter eats parts. And a culture that rewards the sergeant who says unsafe as much as the ace who says victory. Across the program, 18,480, 2 liberators took their numbers, a figure that makes the hair rise even now. Packard built Merlins by the 1,000, so the P-51D could keep promise after promise, all the way to a smoking target and all the way home. Refineries turned out rivers of 100-octane gasoline, and tanker drivers made sure the rivers met the runways. All of it shows up on a radar screen that holds steady when nerves try to lie. The Americans did not invent fog, rain, or flak. They made those things matter less. H2X radar AN divided by APS-15 let a formation ride one solution when eyes were blind. Jammers scratched at enemy plots and radios. Navigation beacons whispered truth into the headsets of men too tired to trust their guts. Briefings taught them to prefer checklists over heroics. This is how you schedule a continent. A lead navigator drew the Elbe bend in grease pencil and tapped the place the scope would glow. "There," he said. A bombardier nodded and wrote the angle of drift. A radio operator copied a call sign onto a pad already soft with graphite. They were invoking a process that turned fear into steps and steps into hits. Jack Mercer lay on a hospital cot and learned he could tell time by the pattern of the day's shock. The night had been firestorm. The day before had been rails. Now the Americans were coming again. He whispered, "Do it clean," and waited for deliberate strings that meant math had beaten fury. Taffy, behind wire, watched the trucks rumble before dawn and shook his head in wonder. He had worked a marshalling yard in peacetime. Here, the enemy would have none of those things. Cut the same joint twice in 24 hours, and you do not just damage steel, you erase hope from timetables. On the other side, a German station master tried to send a message that would not send. He looked at a timetable that described a country that no longer existed. The sun rose through a mask of smoke, and he understood, sick and clear, that distance had failed him. American minutes had crossed it. The numbers look like boasting until you remember they were paid for. On 14 February, the 8th Air Force dispatched more than 1,000 bombers and nearly 1,000 fighters across Germany. Much of the bombing was by H2X through cloud and smoke. On 15 February, they came again. This is the thing tyrants forget about free nations. Once the pipeline fills, it does not care about speeches. It serves the plan. Listen to a handful of sentences and hear the machine breathe. "We bomb by the leader when the scope paints it bright," a bombardier wrote on his kneeboard. "Their long fighters steal our time," a captured mechanic said, and he was right. "No whistles today," Mercer wrote again, because the sound of nothing can be the loudest truth of all. Each line is a gauge. Each gauge reads the same thing. Dominance measured in minutes. The setup asked how any force could do this in winter, through cloud, against a defended empire. The answer is the American blend of heart and habit. Heart pays for the risk. Habit makes the risk productive. You grow trust on factory floors, in training flights, at midnight over coffee, while a crew chief lectures a young pilot about why a certain cotter pin must face a certain way. Production figures finish the argument. One plant could turn out a B-24 roughly every hour at peak. P-51 seconds rolled out in 5-digit totals. And still the most American number in all of it may be the minute. 8 seconds more on the scope because a fighter locked horns at the right altitude. 3 minutes shaved off form-up because air traffic control ran the stack like a metronome. An hour saved on turnaround because ground crews had parts on the shelf. The enemy bled to hold ground. America learned to hold time. The payoff was not a pretty picture. It was a silence. Rails that did not sing, telegraphs that did not clack, orders that did not move because the machines that moved orders were dead or burning. People who had believed in distance learned distance is an idea, and America had the tools to erase it. The last thing Jack Mercer wrote that day was only 2 words, simple as a checkbox. Almost over. Numbers make pictures. Willow Run covered square miles under one roof and ran 3 shifts. Across America, factories turned out 15,586 Mustangs, 12,731 Flying Fortresses, and 18,482 Liberators. A navigator reading an AN divided by APS-15 scope used that national weight like a scalpel. He watched a pale oval brighten at the river bend and called, "Steady." Up above, An escort slid across the sun to scare off a late interceptor and checked his watch. Down below, a station master tried to telegraph east and wrote, "Line destroyed." Mercer heard 3 clean strings of impacts and smiled through cracked lips. "Almost over," he said again, because the day finally sounded like an ending. What happened over Dresden was not a surprise to anyone who had ever walked a U.S. factory floor. It was the overseas echo of a foreman's whistle and a nation's habit of doing hard things the same way every time until the hard thing breaks. The first shock is the silence in the bomb site. The city howls. The wind pulls flames into ropes. But inside the B-17G it is quiet math and a green-orange circle called H2X. The lead bombardier watches the AN, divided by APS-15 scope bloom, with the river bend and the pale oval of the Friedrichstadt yards. Smoke erases streets. Radar ignores pride. The toggles on the arm panel are cold against his glove. He sets interval, checks drift, and listens for the leader's release. Over his shoulder, the navigator traces the Elbe in grease pencil and taps the same spot they tapped at briefing. The crew has heard firestorms. Today they plan to cut arteries. He breathes once through the mask and touches the pickle like a bell. On the ground, the station master tastes coal, dust, and ash and tries to throw a point that is now a hole. Telegraph keys are dead. A signal box that ruled a continent of tracks is a stove of white heat. He believed a Baroque skyline made you safe. He learns that rails, not domes, decide wars. He hears a second pattern of explosions step through the yard, and the shape of the day shifts from panic to punishment. A British night made Dresden a furnace. An American noon makes it a broken network. Jack Mercer, the American POW in a hospital barrack, counts the seconds between impacts like a drummer finding tempo. He has heard random raids. This is not random. Strings come clean and even, as if a metronome rides above the clouds. He writes 5 words in a shaking hand. They are hitting the rails. In the corridor, a nurse in grey stops and listens with him and, not meaning to, nods. The sound is terrible and merciful at once. Above them, the bomber stream holds tight. P-51D Mustangs ride watch with the Packard V-16507 singing, buying minutes for men who need sight pictures more than they need glory. A 109 tries to claw up the sun and finds a Mustang already turning. The escort is not there to duel. The escort is there to keep the clock. 8 seconds on the scope can break a dynasty. The wingman calls clear high, and the lead bombardier lets his breathing slow into the cadence of the airplane. Here is a holy smoke truth that makes tyrants swallow hard. The 8th Air Force can bomb accurately through smoke and cloud by radar, then multiply a single precise solution across an entire formation so dozens of bomb bays open on the same heartbeat. Discipline becomes a weapon. Formation turns math into shock waves. The scope shows a shimmering oval, and a city's circulation goes black. A German night fighter veteran watches from a field where fuel drums stand empty. He remembers antennas that dragged on his wings and radar that stole speed but did not grant miracles. He knows Allied electronics set a pace his service cannot match. He watches Mustangs work the edges of the bomber stream and writes in a small notebook, not bitter but exact. They do not wander, they measure. He understands the difference between courage and capacity. Taffy, the Welsh railman behind wire, leans into the fence when the second string of blasts rolls across the yards. He murmurs, points and switches, as if naming bones on an X-ray. He does not cheer. He notes. He braces both palms on cold steel and repeats the sentence he will say 100 times after the war. The Americans cut the arteries while the city still burned. Inside the barrack, Mercer closes his eyes and breathes smoke and hospital ether and the thin hope in his own words. The airplane offers no romance to the men inside it. Frost crawls across the Astrodome. Oil stings the nose. The Norden is a dead weight today. The radar does the seeing. The radio operator guards the net and hears jamming blank out German control, then hears the lead's calm monosyllables. The tail gunner scans the contrails and counts escort, not for beauty, but to know who will keep the last 30 seconds free of claws. Bombs away. The fortress skips, the nose rises. The bombardier watches nothing but a flare of white where the junction should be. He does not look for churches or statues. He watches for rolling secondaries and the stutter of a line dying. He murmurs good and writes time of release on his pad. In that small act, you can hear a nation that builds tools and trusts them. You can hear 10,000 factory whistles echoing in one cockpit. Back on the platform, the station master finally stops pulling a lever that no longer exists. His hands hang. The heat roars. He is a professional. He knows what a day without whistles means. It means men and coal and ammo do not move. It means a front somewhere in the east will wait for rail that will not come. It means the war is a calendar again, and the other side now owns the minutes. Now another holy smoke fact that ends arguments. Even in the smoke of that week, the US daylight attacks came back to the rail targets by instrument, by plan, striking transportation first after the night's flames. That is not bluster. That is doctrine. Night breaks hearts. Day breaks the network. Together they end the lie that distance and beauty protect an engine of war. The stream reforms. The escorts knit overhead. The coast lies west and cold and wide. In the debrief tent, a lieutenant draws the Elbe curve with a blunt pencil and marks a small oval where the scope glowed. He says, "Tracks cut, secondaries visible, smoke to 20,000. Like a man reading weather. No trumpet, no drum. Just the sound of a machine culture doing the one thing tyrants cannot copy. Measure what matters and hit it twice." Mercer folds his note, stares at the ceiling boards, and feels the day settle in his bones. The nurse brings water. The guards are quiet. Taffy rubs rust into his palm and whispers to the fence. "No whistles today." The Luftwaffe man closes his notebook and looks at the sky that used to be his hunting ground. He nods once, a soldier saluting craft, and walks away. Here is the bridge you can feel more than hear. If Americans can bring precision into a firestorm, then the next chapter is the quiet war you cannot see. Radios that blind, beacons that guide, chaff that makes scopes lie. If the enemy thinks the miracle is only fire, the enemy is about to learn that the miracle is also silence. A skinny kid in a radio compartment flips a switch and makes a German controller's world go snow white. He is not famous. He is not even comfortable. His gloves are stiff. His coffee is cold. And the B-17G shivers like a diesel in winter. But when he dials the jammer and hears the enemy frequency turn to rain, he smiles because he knows he just bought a navigator 8 seconds and a bombardier 1 clear call. This is a different kind of courage, the courage to trust boxes and antennas in a storm. Americans learned to make electronics an arm of strategy. H-2X radar drew pictures through smoke. Navigation beacons and disciplined radio procedures made big skies small. Window-thin strips of foil fell like glitter and turned sharp scopes stupid. None of it looks heroic on a poster. All of it breaks the enemy's plan. A fighter vector that comes 30 seconds late might as well be an apology. The question that used to haunt winter crews, how do you find the yard when cloud eats the ground, now has a calm answer that starts with a checklist. Set frequency. Verify beacon. Cross-check H-2X, return with river bend. Fly the leader. Bomb on the scope. The crew treats the invisible like a map they can fold and refold until the creases remember their fingers. It is not magic. It is systems married to nerve. Down below, a German controller snaps at a plot that will not cohere. Mandrels of noise smear lines that should be clean. A squadron launches late into a sky already carved into guarded corridors by Mustangs. A radar operator slaps the side of his set and glares at a snowstorm he cannot sweep away. He is no coward. He is out of tools. He watches contrails drift where the raid should be and feels the terrible new truth creep into his bones. The Americans are not only strong, they are organized to make me blind. Taffy stands at the wire and watches foil tumble in dull winter light like scraps of Christmas. He laughs once, short and bitter. They throw tinsel and steal minutes, he says to the German guard, who misses the joke and spits. Jack Mercer hears something strange through the hospital window. Nothing. No sirens that help, no clean orders shouted on platforms. Only the muffled boom of cuts walking the yard and the rattle of loose glass. In the cockpit, the pilot handles the ship like a cart on ice. His eyes bounce between airspeed, manifold, and the way the leader's tail wobbles in the gusts. The radio operator's world is simpler and deeper. He listens for call signs. He keeps the net clean. He throws a wall of noise at the wrong moment in the right place. He is a citizen with a toolbox, and his wrench is invisible. A Luftwaffe veteran who once hunted at night writes later that the Allies always had one more trick. It is not a trick. It is the marriage of universities and factories, of students who turned physics into metal and officers who turned metal into methods. The Americans did not arrive with one miracle. They arrived with a binder of them and the discipline to use them in order. Here is today's holy smoke fact. When smoke and cloud hid the city, American crews still hit rail yards by instrument and formation, and enemy plots went wrong because radio countermeasures smothered vectors at the hour that mattered. That is not guesswork. That is the quiet war running like a bass line under the loud one. You cannot film jamming. You can film its shadow fighters showing up late, flak walking the wrong altitude, a bombardier riding a scope picture no shell can erase. From the barrack bed, Mercer hears an odd rhythm. A few guns fire at nothing, then nothing answers back. He writes, "We were alone with the Americans," and underlines it twice. The nurse opens, the window a crack and ash floats in like grey snow. Somewhere close, a child coughs. Somewhere far, a crew chief in England wipes frost off a whip antenna and thinks of the kid he trained who is now making silence into a weapon. The Mustang flight over the stream feels the quiet war too. Position calls are crisp. Vectors are clean. A 190 tries to dive through and meets a pair already crouched on the path. The P-51D's bubble canopy flashes in thin Sunday. The pilot keys the mic once, tally, 2 o'clock high, and the rest of the sentence is movement. Escort is geometry. Jamming is the eraser on the enemy's protractor. A German station master, shoulders white with ash, tries to think of a route around a hole that used to be a yard. He reaches for a timetable and finds a relic. He reaches for a phone and finds a dead thing. He looks up into a sky that once ran on rules and sees only contrails and glitter, and a pair of little fighters sitting exactly where they need to sit to keep the minutes safe for the bombers. The crew lands at dusk. Tires hiss on wet concrete. The radio operator unplugs and feels blood return to his fingers. He will never get a medal anyone remembers. He will get something better. The quiet knowledge that a tool used right at the right time on the right frequency can end a war a day sooner. The debrief clerk asks, "Jamming effective?" And he nods. That checkmark is a brick in a wall built of checkmarks. There is a line you can draw from an American lab bench to a German teleprinter that never clicks. There is a line you can draw from a foil strip to a fighter 10 miles late to a rendezvous it cannot win. There is a line you can draw from a sergeant who insists on a test set reading to a bombardier who believes what his scope shows. The lines are thin. The results are iron. This is the bridge to the next revelation. If radios and radar can turn chaos into coordinates and blind an enemy at noon, then the full weight of Allied partnership can do something even bigger. Strike in two doctrines on the same city, at night and day, heart and arteries, hammer and chisel, until movement itself fails. The quiet war clears the lane. The big blow is coming. The night is a furnace. The day is a knife. Dresden learns both in 48 hours. British bombers paint the sky with fire on 13-14 February 1945. Streets howl. Roof tiles skate off like coins. Cellars become ovens. No one sleeps. At dawn the smoke stacks into towers that make their own wind, and men who think distance is a shield breathe out relief that dies in their throats. The United States is coming by daylight. not to paint, but to cut. The target folders do not show churches. They show rails. A British sergeant on a Pathfinder crew, red-eyed and shaking, watches the glow behind him and says to the ground, "May the Yanks make it count." Across the water, a U.S. operations officer pins fresh flimsies to a board at 3 in the morning. The board is clean, the plan exact. The 8th Air Force will ride in on time with radar, with escorts, with a task written like a sentence: disable Friedrichstadt and Neustadt, sever the yards that feed the east, and leave the network in shards. From his barrack bed, Jack Mercer hears the first American engines before anyone else in the ward does. He has learned to sort the song of a Merlin from the blunt thunder of a radial. He closes his eyes and sees a scope he has never seen. He mouths the words, "steadiest hand," like a prayer for a man he will never meet. Then the steps of explosions begin to walk the same ground the firestorm trampled, and his breath goes out in a long, shaking laugh. 2 doctrines, 1 city, and the rail heart is the second target. In the control room of a German air defense sector, a controller gnaws a pencil and tries to build a picture from plots that slip like fish. Jamming turns vectors into guesses. Contrails stripe the high sky where no one expected daylight work. The man knows his geography. He knows the Bestande in the east need trains more than they need speeches. He barks orders that arrive too late and looks at a clock that has stopped being his. On the platform, the station master, so sure of the old schedules, stares at a switch frozen by heat and concussion. He used to know where a train came from by the smell of its smoke. Today, the only smell is cooked brick and creosote. He has a pencil behind his ear and nowhere to write a rescue. He learned to love timetables as a boy. He watches timetables die. Taffy at the wire hears British voices behind the buzz of American engines. He thinks of the odd partnership. Night hammers the city, day cuts the network, and the result is something a single Air Force alone could not achieve so quickly. The RAF's craft in darkness brings terror. The USAAF's craft in daylight brings paralysis. Together they break movement, and war without movement is theatre without actors. Above, the B-17Gs settle their boxes into the wind. The lead's H-2X scope makes smoke irrelevant. The bombardier breathes, steadies, and passes the calm backward through the airplane like a current. The toggles click, bombs step off and walk the yard. The Mustang escort sits on the high arcs and bats away the latecomers. You can draw it on a napkin. Night breaks hearts, day breaks rails, and an army somewhere far away finds out it cannot arrive on time. Here is the holy smoke fact that ties the knot tight. Within the same span that a firestorm ate the city core, the 8th Air Force executed radar, guided daylight strikes on the marshalling yards, a second blow designed not to add flames but to wreck the enemy's ability to move. That is Allied synergy at machine scale. It is not a slogan. It is a calendar entry that says, "Finish." Mercer writes a line that seems too small for what it carries. No whistles today. He sets down the pencil and cries without sound. The nurse pats his shoulder and looks out the window and watches a grey flurry drift down that is not snow. She has never seen a marshalling yard from the air, but she understands exactly what it means to stop trains in a war that lives on trains. A Luftwaffe veteran, grounded now, curses the wood and glue. Mosquitoes he once could not catch and the sleek Mustangs he cannot face, and then lowers his voice and admits the thing he hates most to admit. Their system beats ours. He says it to a friend like a confession. The friend nods and looks at his boots. They both are brave. They both know bravery without supply is a song without a guitar. Numbers, when spoken plain, become thunder. On 14 February alone, the 8th Air Force dispatches more than 1,000 bombers and nearly 1,000 fighters across Germany. Much of the bombing by H-2X through thick weather. On 15 February, daylight strikes return. The British night and the American noon form a rhythm the Reich cannot answer. Tyrannies can raise tempers. Democracies can raise fleets. When the crews land, the ground shouts are not cheers. They are checklists reversed. Safeties in, pins inserted, Oxygen bottles tallied, debrief boards filled in block letters, tracks cut, secondaries, smoke to 20,000. A crew chief runs a hand along warm aluminum and says, "Good girl," to a machine that is also a national promise made of factory light and farm boys and teachers and sergeants who insist on the right talk. The station master sits on a crate and stares at the lever that used to make a city move. He is not a villain. He is a professional who has outlived his tools. He hears no whistles. He hears the wind in broken wires and the soft roar of a nation he cannot see finishing a job he cannot stop. For a moment he understands America without ever seeing it, a place where people keep promises to strangers at scale. This is the bridge that binds what comes next. 2 hammers have fallen on 1 anvil, and the shape they leave behind is not just ruin, it is scheduled death. If America can cooperate across oceans to make that happen in 2 days, imagine what happens when its full industrial math and moral patience are tallied at war's end. Engines cough in the dark, floodlights snap on, coffee steams in tin cups, a ground crewman checks safety wire by feel and signs his initials with a pencil stub. A weather officer sketches the jet stream with chalk, then underlines the winds aloft. A navigator folds a flimsy, rubs sleep from his eyes, and traces the bend of the Elbe. An armourer chalks arrows on general-purpose bombs and sets fuses for rail cuts. A chaplain stands in a doorway and nods at men who do not need words. This is how America starts a workday when the work is breaking a tyrant's timetable. The briefing is plain. Form up, ride the route, bomb by H2X through smoke, hit the yards at Dresden again. Long-range cover will stay on station. A red circle on the board marks Friedrichstadt, the rail throat that feeds divisions and ammunition to the east. The words are calm because the system is strong. The 8th Air Force has launched days like this for months, in winter, in weather, and in numbers that feel unreal until you watch the taxi line move. Here is the first holy smoke fact. On 14 February 1945, the 8th Air Force dispatched 1,377 bombers and 962 fighters across Germany, much of the bombing guided by radar through cloud and smoke. The next day, daylight strikes returned on transportation targets around Dresden. A republic that could do that on a weekday could decide outcomes on a continent. The miracle is not mystery. It is standardization checklists, interchangeable crews, stock numbers that bring the right part to the right hard stand at the right hour stacked on top of a free people's will. A kid with a headset sits in the belly of a B-17G and checks his AN divided by APS-15. The green-orange circle wakes and breathes. He turns a knob, settles the phosphor into a pale oval that should be rail yard and river. Above him, the pilot watches manifold pressure hold because some refinery cracked 100-octane gasoline and some mechanic bled the lines. A crew works as one machine. Oxygen masks hiss. Gloves squeak on metal. The airplane quivers in crosswind. They fly toward a city already burning from the night before. Over Saxony, the smoke looks like mountains. It tries to hide rails and switches. Radar does not care. The bombardier rides the leader and the formation rides him. One solution becomes dozens. Bomb bays open on command and steel steps off the racks like boots. This is not luck. It is training. It is repetition hard enough to make a stranger's calm voice sound like your own spine. Below, a station master tries to throw a point that is now a hole. Telegraph keys are dead. He tastes creosote, coal, and brick dust, and understands that the sound of a country's heart is not speeches. It is whistles and couplers banging. He hears none of them. He hears strings of impacts walking the yard, and then only wind in wires. Jack Mercer, the American POW in a hospital barrack, hears the day arrive as a rhythm you can tap with a finger. He has learned to sort accident from aim. He writes, "They are cutting what moves war," and closes his eyes. He does not know the names of the groups overhead. He knows only that a nation he cannot see has decided the next hour matters more than the last. Escorts keep the hour safe. P-51D Mustangs slide across the sun with the Packard-built Merlin V16507 humming even at altitude. They do not hunt glory. They guard minutes. They bounce latecomers, break up high slashes, and return to station like clock hands. Ask any bombardier what a guardian is worth. He will point to the calm line his pencil takes across a kneeboard when tracers scribble and the ship does not jink off the run. Here is the second holy smoke fact. At peak, Willow Run could finish a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes. Across the war, American factories produced 18,482 B-24 seconds, 12,731 B-17 seconds, and 15,586 P-51 seconds. These are not numbers. They are a kind of weather that tyrants cannot change. They mean a grounded bomber is replaced, a training loss is absorbed, a tactic is tried again tomorrow. They mean a nation turned production schedules into a weapon. The crews come home over the North Sea at dusk. Wheels kiss wet concrete. Frosted jackets crack at the elbows. The crew chief runs a palm along warm aluminum and grins like a man who has fixed a watch and heard it tick. In debrief, a lieutenant draws the Elba curve on a smudged board and marks an oval where the scope glowed. Tracks cut, secondary explosions, smoke to 20,000. He says it the way a foreman says, shift complete. A German officer in an air defense room stares at blanked plots and late vectors and feels something he hates, respect. He knows his pilots are brave. He knows bravery without fuel, and time is a prayer without an answer. He looks at a clock that does not belong to him anymore. He understands what the Americans have bought with training and gasoline and factories and a binder of procedures, control of minutes. The last sound of the day is not cheers. It is pins going back into arming wires, safeties clicked, oxygen bottles tallied, logbooks signed, and a chaplain's low blessing as men drift to cots. Routine, someone says, and laughs because nothing about flying to a firestorm should feel routine. Yet this is the secret. When a free people make the impossible routine, the impossible loses its power. Tomorrow will look like today. The yards will not. The camera does not lie. A reconnaissance ship skates above the smoke and the world below turns into a study in grey. Tracks that should be iron lines are pocked and broken. Sidings twist like licorice. Signal boxes show as white squares of raw ruin. A photo interpreter lays a clear overlay on a light table, circles junctions and whispers, "There." He is not cheering. He is finishing the proof. The raid hit what the plan said to hit, the yards that make armies move. A US analyst adds arrows to a map and writes numbers in the margin. East-west throughput falls. Alternate routings clog and fail. Ambulance trains stall because sidings are unusable. Ammunition sits where it is dangerous and useless. This is not about a skyline. It is about a network. The RAF's night waves turned the center into a furnace. The USAAF's daylight strikes turned the rails into a graveyard. The combination breaks movement. War without movement is a poster taped to a wall. Here is the number that ends arguments. After the dust and rumor settled, Dresden's own historians fixed the dead at roughly 25,000. It is a terrible total. It is also a true one. Democracies keep ledgers even when the sums hurt. You honor the living by speaking straight about the dead. You do not inflate to win debates. You count because counting is a promise to the future that lies will not become history. A station master sits on a crate in a burned-out office and stares at a lever that once controlled a city. He used to love timetables. He loved their neat lines and their faith that tomorrow repeats today. He runs a filthy hand over his hair and listens for a whistle. Wind answers. He stands, walks to the platform edge, and looks at rails that do not meet. He understands that the front far away will wait for trains that will not come. Jack Mercer writes 5 words. No whistles. No trains. Quiet. The nurse brings water. She looks at the window and sees grey flakes that are not snow. In the ward, a man coughs and another murmurs a prayer from a church that is now a shell. Mercer is not cruel. He is grateful. He knows this quiet is the sound of a war getting shorter. He closes his eyes and imagines a room at home where clocks tick because they are supposed to. Taffy at the wire nods to himself like a foreman. Points and switches, he says, because he can see the map in his head. He has worked a yard. He can feel the jam that will ripple across the region when the knot won't untie. He leans his forehead against cold metal and tells the guard, "You'll be riding wagons before long." The guard spits and says nothing. He can hear the silence too. Here are more figures that turn into pictures when you place them next to the rails. America's factories produced 18,482 B-24 seconds, 12,731 B-17 seconds, and 15,586 P-51 seconds. Those numbers do not exist to boast. They exist to explain why radar-guided daylight strikes could return after a night firestorm, why escorts could stay on station, why damaged groups could be made whole, and why planners could schedule a second blow without asking permission from chance. You see their meaning in a light table circle around a broken junction. The Luftwaffe veteran who once flew with heavy aerials on his wings writes later that Allied electronics always seemed a step ahead. He is not making excuses. He is recording an outcome, an enemy who decided not just to build machines, but to build a system that multiplies their effect. He remembers mosquitoes that found him when he hid, and Mustangs that waited where he turned. His conclusion is hard, clean, and honest. Courage met capacity and lost. A US debrief board fills with block letters. Tracks cut. Secondaries observed. Smoke to 20,000. A clerk underlines the raid time and pins a photo underneath. This is the ledger of outcomes, not intentions. The war ends faster when rails die. Divisions cannot redeploy. Coal cannot feed boilers. Guns cannot reach where plans require them. All of that shows up as empty tracks and empty stomachs and empty maps. The city's historians close their own ledger with the figure that history now carries. About 25,000 dead. It is grief in numerals. It is also the end of fantasy. Myths that stretched into the hundreds of thousands do not survive in a free world that insists on audited truth. The same culture that built radar scopes also built commissions. The same hands that riveted wings also turned pages. Americans do not win by lying to themselves. They win by getting the math right and taking responsibility for the weight of it. The fighter pilot who rode high above the bomb run writes a small note in his own log. Held cover. 2 passes. 1 probable. Bombers on time. He does not see the photographs or the overlays. He does not need to. His minutes protected someone else's aim. That is the grammar of victory in a republic. Strangers keep each other's time and trust the ledger to tell the story. At night, the wind moves ash along the tracks like dry surf. Somewhere far east, a headquarters waits for a train that is late and then cancelled and then not even on the new sheet. A colonel frowns, rubs his temples, and tells a captain to work around Dresden. The captain tries. There is no around. The city still stands in places. The network does not. This is the sentence the photographs write. This is the outcome the numbers prove. The bridge forward is simple. If the ledger of outcomes shows rails dead and movement broken, the final reckoning must show why only America could do this at this speed, at this scale, with this insistence on truth afterward. Totals that look impossible will make sense when you remember factory whistles and checklists and a creed that says tools and honesty beat bluster. The verdict is coming. Start with a kid at a mill in Ohio feeling steel sing under a cutter. Add a woman at Willow Run snapping a Clico and grinning at the pace. Add a refinery hand in Texas measuring octane and signing a drum with a grease pencil. Add a teacher who turned farm boys into mechanics who can swap a magneto in a snow squall by flashlight. Add a chaplain who stands in a drafty doorway with a quiet word, and a cook who pours coffee at 3 in the morning. Now, add a checklist, a doctrine, and a radar scope. That is America when it is serious. That is why a city that believed distance would save it learned that distance is a story machines can change. The verdict begins with totals. 18,482 B-24 liberators, 12,731 B-17 Flying Fortresses, 15,586 P-51 Mustangs, Willow Run at peak, finishing a bomber every 63 minutes. These numbers sound like bragging until you set them next to February 1945 and watch them turn into sorties that cross the North Sea in winter, escort that waits where it should, and a second daylight strike that hits a yard already wreathed in smoke. Only a free industrial giant can make "again tomorrow" part of a war plan. The verdict adds method. H2X radar, AN divided by APS 15, drawing a pale oval of the yard through cloud and fire. Formation bombing that multiplies one precise solution across dozens of bays. Radio countermeasures that turn an enemy controller's screen into rain. Navigation beacons that keep streams ordered in a sky the size of a continent. Standardization so tight that a crew can step into an unfamiliar ship and find the oxygen valves where their hands expect. Checklists so good that nerves don't get a vote. People think heroism is wild. America's heroism here is boring on purpose. It is procedure obeyed when fear wants improvisation. The verdict includes honesty. Dresden's own commission settles the dead near 25,000. The figure is awful. It is not a myth. It stands because free societies insist that the ledger match the ground. The same people who could bomb through smoke by instrument could also count by record and say, this, not that. That is a kind of superiority no tyrant understands. The strength to publish your own hard truths and keep the respect of the world you will live in after the guns go quiet. Voices carry the verdict better than trumpets. No whistles today, wrote Jack Mercer, the American POW who learned to measure war by the beats between impacts. They're cutting the arteries, said Taffy, the Welsh railman behind wire, because he could see points and switches with his eyes closed. A Luftwaffe veteran admitted later, flat and honest, that Allied electronics always seemed a step ahead. None of these men are posters. All of them are witnesses. They describe a thing only America could sustain. Precision layered en masse, mercy valued enough to measure death correctly, and the patience to repeat what works until the enemy's calendar collapses. The verdict respects opponents. German pilots were brave. Station masters were professionals. The problem they faced was not lack of heart. It was lack of time, fuel, radios and reach. When Mustangs guard bomber minutes, when radar ignores smoke, when jammers smear vectors, when factories backfill losses faster than winter can claim them, courage alone cannot save a schedule. The Reich tried to run on speeches and fear. The United States ran on talk settings, octane, radio discipline, and a habit of showing up with the right tool again tomorrow. Here is the holy smoke stack that closes the case. 2 Allied doctrines struck the same city within 48 hours. Night lit the center, day cut the rails. The 8th Air Force sent 1,377 bombers and 962 fighters across Germany on 14 February, much of the bombing by H2X, and returned in daylight to transportation targets around Dresden. One American plant finished a B-24 roughly every hour at peak. Across the war, US factories produced more than 300,000 aircraft of all types. Put those truths together, and you can see why a city that seemed safe learned it was a junction on a map Americans could redraw. The last page of the verdict is not a roar, it is a routine. Wheels down on wet concrete, pins back in. Oxygen tallied. Debrief board filled with tracks cut. Secondaries, smoke to 20,000. A crew chief pats warm metal and says, "Good, girl," to a machine that is also a promise kept to strangers. A photo interpreter circles a junction and writes the time. A supply sergeant signs a form that means there will be flares tomorrow. Freedom sounds like that. It sounds like a factory whistle far from the front, and a pilot's calm voice saying "steady," and a prisoner breathing easier because the rails went quiet. Why only America? Because only America in 1945 combined continental industry, scientific problem-solving, standardized training, and moral clarity into a force that could bomb through smoke in daylight right after a night firestorm, hit what mattered, and then tell the truth about what happened. Other nations were brave. Only this one could make the impossible a schedule. Dresden is the proof. The city kept its art and lost its timetable. The army in the east waited for trains that never came. The night burned. The day measured. The rails died. And a young republic showed the world what it looks like when a free people decide to finish.